This is Strategic Moves with Ken Dow.
But so I grew up raised in Denver. My father was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. My brother's a pastor. I have a sister who's a minister as well, pastor. So I grew up in that tradition, the Baptist tradition. So my father was very well known across the country, Reverend Dr. Phillips. And I started preaching, Ken, when I was 5 years old. I wanted to start when I was 4, but my mother was very smart. She didn't want her baby son to be a preacher. She said, well, give him a year. If he still wants to do that, I would let it pass. But a year later, going to kindergarten, I said, Mom, I still want to be a preacher. So I was a boy preacher. And so my first church, I was 16 years old. And I was actually in high school still and pastoring church, playing football, that kind of thing.
Let's go on this point for a second. How are you a preacher at 4 and 5 years old? Now, I guess it ain't hard when everybody in the family is preaching.
That's it.
And they looking at you and you just mimicking a lot what you see, right?
Exactly right. What I would do, we didn't have daycare. I was born in the 60s, so there was no such thing as daycare. We had a babysitter.
Right.
At the babysitter's house, we would play church, and I would be the preacher. And I'd put water on my face and run around there. Yeah, and I always remember, the most thing I remember about that kid is I always remember to take an offering at 5 years old.
Was you getting any offering?
I was getting, they'd bring them quarters and nickels. I had a deacon getting that money. Yeah, as a little kid, I've been like that for a long time. So, and I just grew up in the church tradition. People don't grow up like that anymore. When I was a kid, everything was right in the neighborhood. So I grew up that way. So because of how I grew up, it was just natural for me to become a preacher. If you grow up on a farm, you're going to become a farmer. If you grow up in a neighborhood of preachers, that's what you're going to become.
This is Strategic Moves with Ken Dow.